to listen about this tragedy, this injustice. Bless our speakers tonight and open our hearts to your justice and give us some effective action. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. And our first speaker is Mark Little, not Little Mark, and who's going to start with his presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. I also have to thank Mark Webb and the Diocesan Peace Commission to put this on, this talk, because this talk is so important, raising awareness of modern slavery. So thank you, Mark, for inviting me to speak on behalf of all the enslaved and voiceless people of the world. Now, I've been living on this planet for well over 80 years, and for 3/4 of that time, I'm ashamed to admit that I had no idea that I lived in a world chock full of slaves. Then, in 2001, 24 years ago, I just happened to watch a Channel 4 TV documentary on the subject, which shook me to the core. Slavery in the United States? Surely not. Slavery in the United Kingdom? Never. Millions of slaves in India. Within 4 months, I was out in India specifically to visit 2 of the child slave rehabilitation centers featured in that documentary film. Now, the nature and extent of this global crime has dominated my thoughts and actions ever since I first listened to the heartbreaking testimony of some of the survivors I met on that first visit, who were in the process of rebuilding their lives at the center. Ashraf was one of those survivors, and it was his story which propelled me to leap from outrage to action to help alleviate the effects of a crime which is expanding like knotweed around our planet. Ashraf was the domestic slave of a high-ranking Indian civil servant. One day he wasn't feeling very well. He found it difficult getting out of bed, but his master thought that he was play acting. And as a punishment, he said to Ashraf, "You will not eat or drink anything for 2 days, at least 2 days." Near the end of the second day, his master gave Ashraf 2 glasses of milk to give to his own sons. The boys drank the milk, left some dregs. Ashraf was caught in the act of drinking the dregs. And as a punishment, his right hand was taken and blackened over the flames of a gas stove. And not satisfied with that, his master, aided and abetted by his wife, got a red-hot screwdriver and branded Ashraf all over his body and all over his face. And a few moments before I took that photograph, I counted 21 marks on little Ashraf's face. Fortunately, Ashraf's story does have a happy ending. I caught up with him about 3.5 years later and discovered he had a fantastic talent for art. And here he is showing me some of his artwork. And the last I heard of him was that he was making a fairly successful living as an artist somewhere in Delhi. Today, we're living in an era of unprecedented turmoil. Before the coronavirus pandemic, record numbers of people were fleeing wars, persecution, and natural disasters. Terrorists were lurking on every continent, and the international community was grappling with acute migration challenges in regions like the Mediterranean, the Balkans, Africa, and the Bay of Bengal. Now, of course, we're in an even worse situation caused by the coronavirus, by Putin's criminal actions in the Ukraine. Look what's happening in Gaza, and rising prices for everything. For human traffickers and slave masters, these hardships represent welcome business opportunities, and their prime targets for exploitation are the displaced, the very poorest, the most vulnerable human beings on this planet. I do still fear for some of the women and the unaccompanied children who streamed out of the Ukraine right into the clutches of the human traffickers and slave masters. If and when normality returns, millions of these unsuspecting victims will continue to be deceived and transported across regions, countries, and even continents for their organs, or pressed into armed combat, or forced to toil for no pay in factories, in fields, in homes, in hotels, in quarries, in restaurants, and in the sex trade, where they are used and abused. And for young girls, really young girls, repeatedly traded on the female used body market, where they are passed from man to man like a shared cigarette, used and then all too often stubbed out, so that a 3-year-old girl to hire for sex is more expensive than a 4-year-old. And a 4-year-old is more expensive than a 5-year-old. I know that in the United Kingdom, many people still labor under the comforting myth that slavery is a thing of the past, and that the practice ceased with the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in the American Civil War. Others see the problem as a different perspective, from a different perspective. They believe that modern slavery is a new phenomenon, but that is restricted to countries such as China, India, Nigeria, North Korea, rather than the United Kingdom. After all, did we not 18 years ago in the United Kingdom celebrate the 200th anniversary of the abolition of the Slave Trade Act of 1807? And was not slavery itself abolished in Britain and the Empire by the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833? The reality is that whilst the laws permitting slavery have been repealed everywhere, people around the world continue to be brutalized and broken, exploited and enslaved through violence or the threat of violence, and in increasing numbers. Making something illegal doesn't make it cease to exist. Making something illegal only causes it to vanish from view. So behind closed doors, in remote places, and right on our noses, slavery and the slave trade has continued throughout the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st centuries, making people rich, feeding our lifestyles, and burning up lives. According to the International Labour Organization and the Walk Free Foundation, there were approximately 15 million people enslaved worldwide in 2021, and 1 in 4 of these were children. Every day, some 22,000 people enter into slavery, and in the time that I'm scheduled to deliver this presentation, half an hour, some 450 human beings will become victims of slavery. Do we have any slaves in the United Kingdom? Well, the Global Slavery Index estimated that there were something like 122,000 people living in modern slavery on any given day in 2021. According to the National Crime Agency, the number of people annually trafficked for slavery into the United Kingdom is rising rapidly. In 2023, the number of cases reported by the National Referral Mechanism was 17,004. And that was the highest number of potential victims reported to the National Referral Mechanism since that started in 2009. So, most of the victims of trafficking into in the United Kingdom come from the United Kingdom itself. And after that, it's people who come from Albania and Vietnam. So once again, it's the same old story. Behind closed doors, in remote places, and right under our noses in plain sight. Slavery has continued in the United Kingdom because of the public's lack of awareness or apathy, because of our porous borders, and because of the failure of past governments to tackle the problem, especially the exploitation of young girls into sex slavery, as evidenced by those high-profile cases in places like Rochdale and Rotherham, where so many young girls were groomed into sex slavery. A recent article in the Telegraph tells a familiar story of exploitation into this country. And this one is about a 15-year-old Lithuanian girl called Lisa, who came to this country expecting to work in a cafe. But as soon as she arrived in the country, her passport was taken away from her, and her escort sold her to an unnamed Albanian. This man raped her continuously for a week and then forced her to work in a brothel. And unbelievably, during the next 18 months, Lisa was traded 8 times on the female used body market around the cities of Sheffield, Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Bristol, and London before she escaped and fled to the police. And sadly, only 3 of her slave masters were ever brought to justice. You pick up any newspaper nowadays and you can read about county line gangs grooming children, not only to distribute drugs, but also to steal cars for them, to beg for them. We have to do something to protect our children from being dragged into slavery. And it was Kofi Annan, the former United Nations General Secretary, who said, "There is no trust more sacred than the one that the world holds with children. There's no duty more important than ensuring that their rights are respected, that their welfare is protected, that their lives are free from want and fear, and that they can grow up in peace." Someone has aptly described slavery as the most disgracefully overlooked crime against humanity, and the charge is justified because many governments appear to be doing very little to enforce their own ratification of Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or any other anti-slavery convention. So as a result of this governmental inaction, the traffickers and the slave masters are getting away with it. Over the past decade, there's been no significant improvement in the overall criminal justice response to these crimes against humanity. According to the 2023 Trafficking in Persons report issued by the US State Department, the number of victims identified in 2022 was a mere 115,000. Sounds like a big number, but as a percentage of the number of people who are estimated to be in slavery, it is a mere 0.23%. And then look at the pathetic figures for prosecutions and then for convictions. Look at the percentages. So how can we as individuals or even as organizations help in this fight against slavery? Well, I always say, first of all, you educate yourself about modern slavery and then help others to become aware of the problem. You can give or organize presentations, and I'll talk about those organizing presentations later on in my talk. We can insist that businesses check their supply chains for slave-produced products. We can provide anti-slavery bodies with funds to support their work. As consumers, we can restrict our purchases to fairly traded goods. We could urge our political representatives to promote and or strengthen anti-slavery laws. I could go on and on about the number of ways that we can actually help in this fight against slavery. Lack of time precludes me from expanding all of my take action suggestions, but I just want to say a few words about my own organization that I belong to for the last nearly 40 years. I started an organization called the Rotary Action Group Against Slavery, and is now a global organization. We've got about 2,700 members at the last count, when I knew what the numbers were, in about 66 countries. And our main aims were, as you can see, raising awareness about this issue and taking action by initiating projects, but also encouraging other people to support anti-slavery organizations. Raising awareness is crucial because it often leads to action. If we don't know about a problem, we can't care about it. And if we don't care about it, we will never act. If we don't act, it is inevitable the problem will continue to exist or become even worse. So we need to raise awareness of this issue of modern slavery in order to increase the number of people who care, because these are the people most likely to demand that their governments do enforce their anti-slavery laws. Raising awareness through education may also help the public to be instrumental in freeing slaves within their own localities. We need people in communities who have their eyes open, who are sufficiently aware of their surroundings that they can sense when something doesn't really look right. When the man cleaning their car has no safety equipment, looks underfed and tired. When a neighbor's live-in nanny never seems to leave the house and is too frightened to talk to them. When a person is always accompanied by someone who appears controlling or threatening. When the holiday let at the end of the road is being visited by different men all through the day and all through the night. And coming to supporting the work of anti-slavery organizations, that is so important, because these organizations, they are so few in numbers. They're like mice fighting a herd of elephants. These activists and their organizations know how to set slaves free. They know how to rehabilitate the survivors. They know how to teach them about their rights, how to ensure that they don't return to enslavement, how to reintegrate them back into their own homes. What they find difficult is mobilizing the funds that will extend their work further. And we can help in so many different ways. But of course, in order to tackle any problem, you first need to understand what slavery is, why it exists, where it exists, what motivates the slave master, and how it affects the victims. So let's start off with the definition. My definition of a slave is quite simple. It's someone who's forced to work, unpaid, unable to leave, and controlled by violence or the threat of violence. For these people, their free will is taken away. Their labor, their lives, and their minds are consumed by someone else's greed. And my visits to various trafficking shelters in countries like Nepal, India, Thailand have made me realize that one of the great crimes of slavery is that it goes beyond servitude. It goes to the point of eliminating the identity of the individual. And the younger someone is taken into slavery, the less likely they are ever able to repossess their own identities. In effect, they become like zombies. Now, it's difficult for you or I, who take our freedom for granted, to imagine the physical and the psychological torments endured by those who are enslaved. But I can never forget the heart-wrenching words of a guy called Keshananka, a former child slave who was born into bonded labor in India, but who was freed after 16 years of servitude. And my slide shows him on the left receiving an anti-slavery award on behalf of all bonded laborers in India. And in accepting that award, he said this, some of the most powerful words I've ever heard. He said, "You people who are free, who were born free, and who always lived free, will never understand what it's like to be a slave. When I was a slave, I could never have dreamt that one day I'd be standing here talking to you as a free man. My whole world was the farm where I was in bondage, and I couldn't have imagined anything else. Because someone somewhere felt that I shouldn't be a slave, and then did something about that, I'm now a free man." And he went on to say, but you must forget, if someone tells you year after year that you have no rights to think, you stop thinking. And if they say to you, you must not cry, you stop crying. So that's what I mean when I say slavery eliminates the identity of the individual. And this is the essential ingredient of one-day slavery and gives us a very simple definition. Slavery to me is simply the total control of one person by another for the purpose of economic exploitation. And that control is exercised in many different ways, but always with zero regard for a captive's welfare. And I'd like to illustrate in that last comment, i.e. zero regard for captive welfare, a few case examples that I've come across in my work out in the field of modern slavery. Guno was a bonded slave who, like the rest of the village, his villagers, worked in a stone quarry for a cruel master called Ramesh Garg. He recalled for us a hot summer's day when a young Dalit girl started work, just begun working in the quarry alongside her parents. In her innocence, she wandered from her work to play with a kitten that had strayed into the quarry to drink from a pool of water. Guno didn't notice the girl until he heard the crack of Ramesh Garg's Mauser rifle. The police never investigated the incident. The parents never filed charges. That week, the girl's family cremated her small body. Ramesh Garg paid for the death rites. He then added the cost to the family's debt. My next one, little Mina. Mina was trafficked from Nepal into India to work in a circus. I was relating the story this morning on Radio Maria. But yes, she was to work in a circus where she was expected to perform an act called the Star Kiss. And that involved gripping a trapeze between her teeth whilst being hauled up into the air, swung about without the security of a safety net. And her prize for surviving that evening was being raped by her minders. On that occasion, when we met Mina, I took a whole group of American Rotarians to the rehabilitation center. And one lady was so affected by what she had learned on that particular day that she resolved for the rest of her life to be helping children and adults from slavery. Her name is Carol Metzker, and she's written a book, and I will show you, I've got a book somewhere here, Carol Metzker's book, And if you read chapters, you can get it on Amazon. If you read chapters 2 and 3, and it'll tell you all about our visit to Balika Ashram in Delhi and meeting Mina. There's one chapter devoted simply to Mina. Shiv Kumar was deprived not only of his freedom, but also fresh air. He was a survivor who was enslaved in a carpet factory for 4 years between the ages of 11 and 15. And when I met him, he said to me, Mr. Little, he said, in all that time that I was locked in my tiny dark room, not once did I ever see the sun, the moon, and the stars. Much of the information about the conditions endured by these child slaves have been gleaned from children who have been rescued from their prisons by anti-slavery organizations like SACS. And SACS, S-A-C-C-S, stands for the South Asia Coalition Against Child Servitude. And since its creation in 1989, SACS has liberated over 90,000 children from various industries. And the Channel 4 TV team that I mentioned right at the start of my talk filmed an actual SACS raid on a carpet factory. And the raid succeeded in releasing 19 young boys from their factory prison. And my next 2 slides, sent to me by Channel 4 TV, show 2 of these boys, Huro and Chivji, a few moments after their release. Their story is a chilling but a typical one. Huro and Chivji were cousins who lived in a small village in the state of Bihar. One day, when they were 6 years old, they were playing by the canal that ran by their village. Man came and sat on the banks of the canal and began to talk to them and started to offer them sweets. After a while, he asked them to come with him, promising more sweets. Before the boys knew what was happening, they were bundled into a car by other men. And soon they were hundreds of miles away in another part of India. And this is when their long nightmare began. The boys were separated, and each was locked in a tiny dark room that held a wooden carpet loom. With blows and threats, the man began teaching them how to weave carpets. They were forced to work 18 hours a day. They slept by their loom, used a tin can for a toilet, never left their cells. Their food was the poorest rice and a few beans. So held by violence, paid nothing, making carpets that were shipped to the United States and to Europe, Huro and Chivji were enslaved to feed the greed of the loom owners. And by bribing the police and keeping the boys hidden, he was able to keep them hard at work, locked in a world of fear, hunger, pain, and violence. Huro and Chivji's story does also have a happy ending. After the boys were rescued, they spent 6 months at Mufti Ashram, a boys' rehabilitation center in Delhi, where I met them on a few occasions. Here they were re-educated, A, to believe that they were worthwhile, not worthless, B, to learn to love themselves again, and C, to learn to play and mix with other children. And also because they were Dalits, from the lowest classes, the untouchables. They were, of course, illiterate, so they were taught to read and write and to acquire trade skills such as welding, weaving, electronics, screen printing, tailoring. Now they are successfully making their way in the world thanks to the education and training which they received at the ashram. And the last I heard of them was they were also having a successful living as tailors somewhere in Delhi. In the past 24 years, I have traveled all over the United Kingdom and abroad, trying to open the eyes of as many people as possible to the unseen world where millions languish in slavery because of poverty, because of corruption, and because of greed for profit on the backs of vulnerable people. I've looked into the eyes and hearts of hundreds of survivors like Huro and Chivji and felt their pain, which is why I formed the Rotary Action Group Against Slavery. I'd like to just show you, by the way, Simon was also a member of the, he was a member of the, he was the secretary of the Rotary Action Group Against Slavery. I was the chairman for 10 years. Yes, a few examples of some of the projects that I've been involved with personally. The first one is, this one was a project which was completed with the help of the Norwich School. I needed about, I think at the last, when I was trying to raise a bus for this organization, I mean, the story was that they had 3 training centers. And they had about 25, 26 girls in those training centers, rescued from the flesh pots of Mumbai. They had, I said, safe houses, 3 safe houses. They also had a training center in another part of Mumbai. But what they didn't have, all they had was a 6-seater Toyota vehicle to take 25 girls to those training centers. And that was so inefficient. So I said, I will go back to England and I will raise the money for you through all the contacts that I had in so many different ways, just by talking, doing presentations. I was about £1,600 short, and I went to the Norwich school, and they said, "Don't worry, Mr. Little, we'll raise that money." And you know, within 5 weeks, money was raised by that school because they did some fundraiser and just raised money. And of course, there's a copy of the bus. There was an article in the EDP about the bus. There is the bus itself. And of course, every time in my work abroad, whenever I raised money, I always wanted to go out to the project to see where the money has been spent, so that I can come back to take photographs of whatever project I took the money for. And there I had the opportunity, because I went back to Mumbai, and there I am with girls of the girls who are accommodated in those safe houses by that organization called You Can Free Us. That's a photograph of them in their training center, and that's me with the girls. And one of the most delightful experiences I had was because we took all those girls out for a day trip out somewhere out of Mumbai, and we also gave them Christmas presents because it was December, fairly near Christmas, and so each girl received a present. And I told them, I want you to express what you feel about being free. And this is how they expressed it. They all jumped up in the air, those girls. And that is a fantastic photograph that I do really cherish. From You Can Free Us, they suddenly decided that they needed not only to help with the girls, to rescue the girls and to accommodate girls from the flesh pots of Mumbai, from big brothels like Katmandu, but also they wanted to work and do some work in Kolkata. And so I said, I started to agree with them to raise funds to set up a new safe house in Kolkata. Now, Kolkata is the Asian city which has the greatest number of what I call female used body markets. Here there are 7 red light districts, and the largest, oldest, and the most notorious is called Sonagachi. These brothels are visited by thousands of men each day, all hell-bent on spending a few rupees for a few moments of pleasure. But for the women and girls, or the thousands of women and girls who live and work there, each brothel is a place of pain. Very few of the sex workers are there by choice, because most of them have been trafficked into the flesh trade against their will. And it is fear, not chains, which keeps them in slavery. I'll repeat that. None of the victims of commercial sexual exploitation are physically chained up, yet they are unable to escape from the clutches of their slave masters. These people, motivated by greed, find it easy to terrorize vulnerable human beings against their will. They just have to say, if you don't do what I ask, I will kill your mother because I know where she lives. Or if you defy me again, I will dispose of your child. As one victim of sexual exploitation explained to me, when you are in a state of constant terror, you can't move. You have no adrenaline. You're always terrified that what will happen next will be worse than what is already happening to you. They might kill your mother. They might also kill you. And she also added, victims like us are everywhere. You only have to look. The total cost of the setting up that safe house was 25,000, but we managed to raise about 16,000 pounds, and so the safe house now is operating successfully in Kolkata. Another example of something that we were helping a boys' rehabilitation center in not far from Allahabad in India, and we got a grant from Rotary International, and we actually paid for the vehicle in advance, went out to Allahabad, myself and two Rotarians, and we drove that vehicle back to Balvikas Ashram. Yeah. This is another example of helping an organization, a rehabilitation center. And of course, you see on the, we were helped by the Rotary Club of Delhi West. And you'll see there, it says right underneath, it says the Rotary Club of Norwich and Edmund. That was a 24-seater vehicle that we, and it was going to be used for educational purposes for the survivors of slavery at Mukti Ashram and Balaka Ashram. Incidentally, the lady who's with me there is a lady called Suman. She's been here. She's been to our church, Bernadette. She's talked to the people, the parishioners of our church, and also Notre Dame and one other school. And she's also spoke at my own Rotary Club as well. I was up in Bihar, which is one of the poorest states in India. In fact, I think it is the poorest state in India. And I suddenly saw that going up. I took a photograph and I couldn't remember what that was. And then, of course, it came to me because that is a project which was actually helped by the lady who I mentioned earlier, who lives at Carol Metzker, who's an author, wrote that book. And she and her club sent enough money for the people of Punanawa Ashram to buy 4 cows and to create a biogas oven. And the idea was that the dung from the cows would be fed into the biogas ovens to provide the energy for the kitchens. And at the same time, while I was there, I noticed that they had these high walls which had barbed wire around the top. And I said, why is the barbed wire there? They said, because many of these girls, when they are rescued, their former masters were trying to retrieve them again, and they would be climbing over the wall. So we have to put barbed wire. And I said, well, why don't you put solar lamps? And that's what we did. We agreed that we agreed that we purchased solar lamps. And I think we raised enough money to buy 18 solar lamps. So the whole area now is surrounded by solar lamps, and it's lit at night. And the girls were helping put the solar lamps out. And there's just a photograph of the site and the effective solar lamps at night. Most of these children, they have vocational training in some sort of skill because it's important. These girls, for example, most of those girls there were former sex slaves, and they were not accepted by their own villages or by their own family. So we had to make sure that they could live an independent life by having some sort of skills. So the girls were learning how to sew, the boys how to mend bikes, and I've been out afterwards to see how these boys are operating when they've created a business. Candle making is another vocational skill, and of course, helping them to read and to write. I'll skip those because I think it must be run. I'd just like to mention this guy. Basu Rai is a young boy who I met, and I met him on 2 or 3 occasions, and he's a small boy. He's probably about 10, and then he was 13. I think he's about 13 or 14 there. And he's with Ashraf, the guy I told you about earlier. And then I managed to meet him in a hotel in Delhi. He knew I was coming to Delhi, and he found out somehow, and he came to see me, and we talked about, what he was going to do in future. And I said, well, you've got to do something about your experience. You've become an activist. He's now an activist. He's now also an author because he's written this book, Basu Rai. It's from the streets of Katmandu. He had been on the streets of Katmandu at the age of 4 because he lost both his parents, and he is now an activist. And I took him along to the Rotary Club of Delhi Megapolis, and there he is talking to the Rotarians. And of course, the Rotarians of Delhi Megapolis are helping him. That's the book. That's an example of something when I said, organize. If you don't know much about slavery, get someone who does know about slavery. And anti-slavery organizations are so keen to help anyone And on this occasion, I said to Hope for Justice, who are a large organization based in Manchester, come to Norwich a couple of days, and I want you to give instructions to all the hoteliers in Norfolk. And that's what they did. And of course, a couple of years ago, I organized a modern slavery conference in Norwich Cathedral, and two of the speakers came. One was Carol Metzker, and another was a former survivor of sexual slavery in the United States, as well as other speakers. I think I'll stop there now, but I'll just conclude. I think today we have a choice on this issue of modern slavery. We can either despair that exploitation is an age-old problem, that human nature will never change, and that in any case slavery is a problem for government, and then do nothing. Or we can reflect upon the physical and the psychological torments endured by those enslaved, the freedom which we enjoy and take for granted, and our own sense of what is right and wrong, and then do our utmost to end this evil practice. Two key obstacles stand in the way of this objective: lack of resources and lack of awareness. In a world where most people loathe slavery, awakening their awareness will unleash great power. When we come to know that we're living in a world of slaves, that their stolen labor and lives feed into our shops, our businesses, and our homes, the urge to act will become irrepressible. And when that urge, that desire that all should be free, sweeps across our world, the end of slavery will be near. And from that desire will flow the resources needed to get the job done, and the liberators needed to help more and more slaves to walk free. If I could put it another way, the more we can increase the intelligence and the decibel levels of the global conversation deploring the evils of slavery, the more likely we're able to reach the ears, the hearts, and the minds of the stakeholders and the decision makers, as well as the slave masters, the traffickers, and the men on the streets buying the girls. Edmund Burke said, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." We must avoid that trap, because if we are neutral in situations of injustice, we've already chosen the side of the oppressor. I say, as individuals, we each have a responsibility to end this obnoxious crime against humanity once and for all. And if you think that you are too small to make an impact, just try going to bed with a mosquito in the room. But our individual actions, however small, can be magnified if they are coordinated with the actions of others. One person jumping up and down won't cause an earthquake, but if we all jump together, the effect would be impossible to ignore. So I always say, let's all start jumping together as members of our parishes in our diocese and engulf the world with the message: let's put an end to slavery. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very, very much for turning out on this horrible February evening. My name's Simon John, and I come from the middle of the diocese, from Thetford, which any of you who are historians will remember was not only the centre of East Anglia, but the ecclesiastical centre of East Anglia many years ago. So I'm going to address I'm going to address partly some moral issues on the subject. Where do we come from individually in relation to modern slavery, and in particular, what we can do about it? And I'm going to talk about, first of all, what people say we might do about it, whether according to religious bodies, state authorities, we might be doing anything about it, or perhaps should we just leave it to the police? a number of people I've spoken to on the subject just say, nothing to do with me. Absolutely nothing to do with me at all. I bear no responsibility for this. I'm concerned about it, of course, but it's for others. Now, that works well until you realize that we are all implicated. There's nobody in this room, I suspect, who doesn't actually possess something that's made by slaves. If you possess any electronic goods, they're more the things that really make it work, in particular in the battery and in other aspects of it, come from coltan in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, just for example. So whether we like it or not, we are involved. So for me, it starts with Isaiah. Always a good source, Isaiah, in terms of telling us about our behavior. He couches it very well in describing it as his behavior. The Lord called out to me and wanted a messenger. Who is going to take the message for me? I will, Lord. He stuck his hand up. And I think he wasn't just speaking for himself there. I think he was saying, this is what we should be doing. And that's sort of reinforced for me by that passage, that quite chilling, at least challenging passage in Matthew at the division of, as it's sometimes put, the sheep from the goats. You did this. I was in prison, I was naked, I was hungry, and you did this. Did I? Yes, you did. And so you go over here. And then to others, he says, well, I was in need, you saw me, and I was naked, I was hungry, I was in prison. You didn't appear to do much. And the difficulty, I think, in life is seeing Jesus in the downtrodden, in the neglected, in the oppressed in life. Because in the West, whether we like it or not, we are part of the oppressors. We don't see ourselves as such. But when people are really quite well off, the other side of the equation often is that somebody else isn't as a consequence. Whether it's our pension, which comes from some investment which takes advantage of other people, or as I say, whether it's something in some of the goods that we consume. There it is. So, oh dear, that's not very visible, is it? So anyway, the facts. Mark has already given you most of them, so I'll just move straight down to the people in the diocese. Yes, slavery in the diocese. I only have the figures as recently as 2022, I'm afraid, but in that year, I think it was 647 slaves were actually found in the diocese. How do I get that number? Very easily. The police supply the figures to the Home Office, who publish them by county police force. And we know that in our diocese we have Norfolk and Suffolk and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And so just by adding those figures, it's about 250 per county actually found. Now we know that those who are found are just the tip of the iceberg. And again, if you prorate the figures estimated, admittedly an estimate, but a very carefully and scientifically calculated estimate by the UN's International Labour Organization and Walk Free, the NGO. In the UK, it comes to, I think actually the most recent figure is 136,000. And most people think that's a very, and it's 3-4 years old, dating to evidence before COVID. And so I think most people consider the figure as much nearer 200,000 now. So if you just prorate that to our diocese, the number in the diocese is probably something in the region of 5,000. That's only a guesstimate, but something of that order. Now, looked at from the point of view of the slave owner, I'd actually be quite uncomfortable about that. Because in this diocese, there are 19,000 mass attending Catholics, probably another, I don't know, 80,000 church attending Christians. So if there are 100,000 people looking for 5,000, and they're all looking, keeping their eyes open, being aware, and wanting to find Jesus in that prison, it ought not to be too difficult for us to find them, ought it? We may not find them tomorrow. We may not find them this year or next. But if we keep this in mind from now on, in what remains of our lives, there's a good chance we'll find one sometime. And if you're that one, wow, won't you be happy that somebody's found you eventually? I say eventually because I don't know if you've noticed a couple of the news reports I've given at the back, but they speak of an example. There's a BBC News story of an 11-year-old who was in a drugs gang. And she says, "Why did nobody find me?" Now, is that ungrateful of her? No, I don't think so. Because Jesus is almost asking us at that division, where were you? Why didn't you visit me in prison? Why didn't you clothe me? Why didn't you feed me? And she's asking the same question. Both Mark and I know a wonderful man called Matt Friedman, who for many years worked for a US aid organization at the time they had them. And he came across a girl in a brothel in, I can't actually, neither of us can remember which city it was, but it was somewhere in the Far East, I think India. And she said, "Where were you? I'm here in a brothel in the center of a red light district, which people are walking backwards and forwards all day, every day. And nobody noticed. Nobody reported me to the police, us to the police." I think there was an additional problem there, as there was in Mark's case, of police corruption. But we don't have that by and large here. And if something is reported to the police, action will be taken. And how different is that from Mark's Airbnb on the corner that's constantly visited every night, every day, by a stream of men? Well, I wonder what could be going on there. It's not rocket science, a lot of this. And another important thing is, when we make this observation, are we supposed to be a detective? Who trained anybody here who isn't a policeman? Who trained us to make deductive investigations? Who gave us the resources? No. So it's not our job to be certain. I don't know if anybody has served on a jury where you're told you may not convict until you are sure. Well, this is the precise opposite. You don't have to be sure. You just need to have a vaguely reasonable suspicion that summits up. It is not right. There's something wrong about it. I don't feel comfortable. I'm going to ring one of these numbers, and one of them is on your leaflet, the Modern Slavery Helpline number, 08000 121 700. The police have told me countless times they'd much rather have 10 false alarms, 100 false alarms, than somebody stay there enslaved in appalling conditions when somebody knew about it but just wasn't sure they should make the phone call. It might bother somebody. Well, it will bother somebody when you make that call. It'll bother the slave owner a lot. And are we going to fight back? Or are we just going to sit by and let it happen? Or as Mark said, quoting Desmond Tutu, if you remember, if in a situation of injustice you do nothing, you actually end up being on the side of the oppressor. None of us want that. So, just going back to the numbers, slavery is growing very fast. At least you can see that graph, I hope. And the annual rate of increase recorded last September, the year-on-year annual increase in the UK was 15%. Well, that's quite a lot. I learnt in my job that if something increased by 10% a year, this is in the bad old days of high inflation in the 70s, then the cost of something would double in 7 years. Increasing at 15%, the numbers of slaves will double every 5 years. By 2050, I think I calculated, the number of slaves in the UK would be 1 million. That's a very bad number indeed. How are we going to cope with that number? Then it really will be difficult to overcome. Today, it's doable. Do we have a right to cheap goods and services? Is that somewhere in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? I don't think so. So cheap doesn't always mean it's been done by a slave. I had some work done on some VHS transfers by a very nice man in Bury St Edmunds, which I picked up yesterday. And he was not expensive, I have to tell you, but there was no slavery involved. He does it almost for the love of it. So it's not absolutely, but if things are cheap, then there's one person that's paying, and that's the labourer. And he's paying with his labour, but without any return for it. Some quotes, which I promised you, from authorities, people who know a bit about this, people who've investigated it. And by the way, there is this wonderful work, which I do urge you to look up on the net. It's called Pastoral Orientations on Human Trafficking, written by the migration team at the Vatican, and blessed and approved by the Pope. And one of the things he said is, we cannot become distracted. We are all called to leave behind any form of hypocrisy, facing the reality that we are part of the problem. This problem is not in the opposite lane. It involves us. We are not permitted to look elsewhere and declare our ignorance or our innocence. I've always been distressed, he said to a different meeting. I've always been distressed, said Pope Francis, at the lot of those who are victims of various kinds of human trafficking. How I wish that all of us would hear God's cry, "Where is your brother?" from Genesis. This issue involves everybody. I do commend to you those two YouTube films, Shady Chocolate, I don't know if you can see the highlighted blue at the top, Shady Chocolate and the Dark Side of Chocolate. They tell you exactly what goes on in that industry, which advertises and prides itself on the care it takes for the children who work from a very young age in the cocoa plantations. And in one of the films, that you see why their life expectancy is no more than 7 or 8 years once they enter those plantations at about the age of 7. There's a great Channel 4, again, film on this. And it shows the cocoa fruit, which is roughly the shape of an American football or an English rugby football on a smaller scale, just roughly that size. And it takes some opening. So they do it with a machete. And they hold the fruit in this hand and they chop it with strength. You need strength to do it. The strength of a 7, 8-year-old is enough. And sometimes they need to hit it twice. And if they do, they may hit it too hard the second time. Or, as frequently happens, the fruit is overripe. And so the machete goes straight through. And what happens then? Is there a medical centre on the farm in the middle of absolutely nowhere? You see, the film shows you the long, long drive to get to this farm and then the long, long walk in to find these people. No medical facilities at all. So they bleed to death. They make an attempt, of course, to get to a hospital 15 miles away, but they don't make it. And Nestle, who make the chocolate most of us eat, they tell us that they take great care, and they've been doing it, and they've been telling the US Congress that don't legislate, we'll self-regulate. We understand what the problem is now. Thank you for telling us. And we'll fix it. But they never will. Because what is it? It's bucks. It's big bucks. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So we can carry on eating that chocolate, or we can buy fair trade chocolate, which isn't perfect. The whole system of fair trade is not yet perfect, but it's a start. And it does mean that tens, I think now hundreds of thousands of children in West Africa have actually gone to school. That's the other beauty about this film. It tells you about the schools that Big Chocolate, Cadbury, now owned by Mondelez, Mars, Nestle, have set up. And he visits one of the schools. It has every appearance on the outside of having a school. Well, that is apart from the fact there's no roof, no doors, no windows. When you go inside, there's grass growing through the floor. There are no desks, there are no teachers, there are no pupils. They're all out there in the fields. So they showed you these on this film. They showed these schools that we're constructing. And 15 years later, it's still in the same condition. It's all an illusion because it's big bucks. There are stories on a piece of paper on or near your chair of modern slavery in East Anglia. These are just a tiny, tiny percentage of the cases that are going on, as you'll understand from what I've said earlier. So yes, these are all this next slide is about the sort of things that we come across on an everyday basis. And that is not necessarily for everybody in this room. Internet porn is highly populated by people who are forced to do the work. Knockoff goods. We all go to a beach. We've all, at some stage in our lives, I'm sure, been to a beach in Europe, along which occasionally you find men walking up and down with big trays of sunglasses and this, that, and the other, some fabulous apparel, all at a fraction of the cost. Why? Well, not because the well-known brand is using him as a distributor, but because in North Africa, these clones of the goods are made by small children. And by buying those goods, you're supporting that trade. And so the story goes on. It's in many forms of food and drink, coffee, and so on. And at the back, and in that leaflet, there's a petition to sign to ask the government to do something that may not be that unreasonable, to ask them to ban the import of slave-made goods. Well, that's controversial, isn't it? Why shouldn't we import slave-made goods? I leave you to think about that one. So what can you do personally, and why should you? I think perhaps you may be able to read this one. And that is, Pope Francis has not just said, well, this is awful. He said the Catholic Church intends to intervene in every phase. Now, that could mean the chap that runs this place. It's all down to Bishop Peter. He's got nothing to do. He must do it all himself. Do you think that's what the Pope means? I don't somehow. Well, all right, the parish priest then. Well, they've got a thing to do as well, haven't they? And they're getting on a bit, a number of them, I think I gather. But then there's the rest of us. There's 19,000 mass attenders of us in the Diocese of East Anglia, and I think that's what he means. I think he means if we all do something, there'll be big change. But it's a numbers game. No good just Mark and I doing it. Everybody, if everybody did it, we'd make a big difference. And people listen to you. They listen to what you say. If you repeat the story, more and more people will do it. Mark's got something to say about that in a minute. So and he goes on, she, the church, wants to protect them from deception and solicitation. She wants to find them. She wants to find them. I can only interpret it as he wants me to find them. He wants us all to find them, and that will lead to their being freed. It's important, and you'll see it in the leaflet, that you don't suspect something and then dash in with a baseball bat. No, you make a phone call. That's all. It's not expensive. Just one phone call could make a massive difference. But it's not just the Pope who who asks us to find them, perhaps by learning to spot the signs. It is also the police. This slide I've already mentioned. Who's got the training, skills, knowledge, database pool, and whose job is it to follow up the suspicions? The police. It's easy. And what do they want us to do about it? Well, I think this slide that you've been which I think is pretty well illegible, is from the police. Yes, it is. So forgive me if I turn around and read it. You probably can't. Report it. Communities have an important role to play in recognising abuse. If you recognise any of the signs and suspect someone may be a victim of trafficking, tell someone. You will always be taken seriously. And then others go on about our eyes and ears. If you don't believe me, search the website of any British constabulary and they say the same. Please be our eyes and ears. Well, I mean, aren't they lazy? Goodness sake, can't they do it all on their own? Were police numbers reduced a while ago? I have a vague feeling they were. And anyway, we know our communities much better than the absent Bobby would have done. So we will notice things. We'll notice those people coming out of a house first thing in the morning and piling into the back of a van that doesn't look like it's got too many seats in, and being driven off by somebody controlling them, or the reverse, all piling into one house at the end of the day. We're the one that will notice the brothel at the end of the street. We're the ones that go and have our nails manicured, and there will be the girl who will be not very communicative and obviously being controlled by somebody. We're the ones who take our cars to the car wash. I wish I did a bit more often, but anyway, who are clearly don't have the right equipment and look as if they're being controlled. And there's a wonderful app, the Safe Car Wash app you can download, and it tells you exactly what to look for. So there is so much that the police ask us to do it, the local authority asks us to do it. So we need the public to help. Be our eyes and ears, says another police officer. So I've already been through this, haven't I? Where were you? And there's another story at the back of the room. You are powerful, I've already said. I'm sure most of you may know the story of the starfish. Little old lady standing at the edge of the water on a steep beach where the tide had just gone out very quickly, and hundreds of starfish are left stranded on the beach. She's at the water's edge, throwing them in. Now, in this version of the story, a young man comes along and says, "What are you doing? This really is ridiculous. You can't possibly hope to save all these starfish." So she leans down again, picks another one up and throws it back in the sea. Remember, this is an analogy. He saved one more person from modern slavery. Suddenly, as he leans down, he feels something in his back pocket. Most of us have it in our back pocket, often, men anyway, our mobile phones. So in a flash, it's out, his mobile phone, and he's on social media. And all his mates in this town are